So my previous video got cut off in the middle of this slide, but emergency consent and treatment. Think this is automatic consent if you are in an accident or you are in an emergency situation and you get taken to the hospital. Experts would agree you have immediate threat to your life, health, or your overall health. They're going to automatically treat you because it is understood that you're giving them you would give them the consent to treat you because you're in an emergency situation. If you needed to be taken straight to surgery, they don't have time to get consent from someone, so it's kind of understood that it's emergency consent. As far as informed consent, this is the legal process where the patient or designee, maybe the patient's power of attorney, gives written permission for something to occur. Typically, we think of informed consent in regards to surgery or surgical procedures. In this situation, informed consent is a document that the patient would sign. Typically, we're going to think prior to a surgery, but it could be before other procedures as well. The doctor is the one that is supposed to explain the procedure to the patient. They should be giving the patient the risk, the benefits, telling them exactly what all is going to occur, exactly how the procedure is going to take place. The nurse's role is only to witness the client's signature and make sure the provider is given consent, to make sure that we are giving the doctor the consent to do the procedure. We are not to explain the procedure. So nurses never explain the procedure that is going to be happening. They're not giving the details of the risk and benefits. If your patient has questions and they don't really understand what the doctor has told them, call the doctor back and have them come back and explain the patient. Let them know they still have some questions. Tell them they have some patient concerns, and then document this as well. Again, it's only our responsibility to witness the client's signature that they are signing that form for consent. Competent adults, they do have the right to refuse or leave. Some of my clinical group may have got to see this week in clinical, but competent adults have the right to refuse. If they are alert-oriented, they are able to make their own decisions. If they decide that they do not want to abide by those decisions, they do have the right to leave against medical advice. Some patients I've seen leave against medical advice because maybe they have something going on at home, they have little kids to take care of for, and they just can't stay in the hospital any longer, or maybe they're truly upset at a decision the provider has made. It depends on the situation, but if they choose to leave against advice, we call this AMA, and they have to sign an against medical advice form documenting that they are indeed leaving against medical advice. If you are ever in the situations where you are sued, what should you do? You want to make sure that you tell your employer, call an attorney, and call an insurance company. There's a link to this case at the bottom. Some of you all may have heard about this case, but we're going to look at a little detailed timeline on the next few slides. Redonda Vaught was a nurse at Vanderbilt Medical Center, so in our same state, and this has been very, very recent. And we're going to look at exactly what the case involved and what happened regarding her case that got brought up, and what all she did at the hospital. So Redonda was a nurse, and she was working in the neuro ICU and neuro step-down units at Vanderbilt Medical Center in Nashville. This is a very large hospital. It's very well recognized in our state. It's always been a leading hospital. It has over 1,000 beds. She had been a nurse for about 2 years at the time that this happened. She was taking care of a patient that was hospitalized for a subdural hematoma. So the patient that this event happened to came into the hospital for a subdural hematoma. After the incident occurred, when she was investigated about the situation, what happened regarding this situation is she gave a incorrect medication to a patient in a PET scan. The patient ended up dying from her giving this incorrect medication. So whenever she was interviewed without legal representation, she states that she was comfortable in her help all nurse role. So she was working in the neuro ICU, neuro step down, but she was working as a help all nurse. She was kind of floating around helping to do certain tasks. She said that she was familiar with the medication dispensing machine. She stated that they were not understaffed. She was not overtired. She worked the day prior. And that she had an orientee with her. She had the orientee with her, but she was comfortable with him being with her that day. So the patient that this happened to, they were in the PET scan. They went to have the scan done, and the patient felt anxious about the scan, which is common. PET scan tech called the primary nurse, which was not Redonda, and got an order for 1 milligram of Versed for the patient from the physician. Redonda was the help all nurse, so she was helping the primary nurse by going to the radiology department to give the meds. The status of the patient was monitored in any capacity before and during travel from the neuro ICU. That's kind of unclear if the physician thought the patient was being monitored or assumed the patient would be monitored after giving a dose of Versed. So we don't really know what happened around that aspect. So the order was entered into the computer at 2:47 p.m. Pharmacy looked at the order, verified it at 2:49 p.m. At 2:59, Redonda went to remove the med from the med dispensing cabinet. She typed in VE under the patient's profile and it didn't come up. So when you go into the medication dispensing cabinet and you type up the drug under the patient's profile, if it was in there, it should have came up. So for her, it did not. So when she did this, she then clicked the override function to obtain access to all the medications. So all of these dispensing machines have the override function to where you can pull up all the medications and you can access every medication in the medication cabinet. It was common practice in the hospital. It shouldn't have been, but this is something that was common for them to be able to do. Some medications I've seen had to be pulled up that way to be able to override it. We used to have to do that for sterile water at the hospital whenever I worked, but this is not something that should occur. She should have called pharmacy to ask why the order didn't populate, because this wasn't an emergency procedure. Typically, a lot of times whenever we do override a medication, it is an emergency. We don't have time to call the pharmacy and ask them why it's not popping up for us to get out. It would be an emergency situation. So again, she's looking at VE. Mini meds came up. She selected the first one. She thought she was picking Versed when she actually selected Vecuronium. Versed is a sedative that a lot of times we use that would be typical for something that we would be giving in the situation it was ordered for. But when she chose Vecuronium, this is a paralytic, often used for emergencies when the patient has a breathing tube or an endotracheal tube and they're intubated. The paralytics make it so the patient cannot breathe. So at least 3 screens on the med dispensing cabinet said warning paralyzing agent. Even on the medication vial, it typically has a warning paralyzing agent tab on the top. So one of these screens had a yellow alert Banner, and she had to provide a reason for using the override function and indicate how much she was removing. So the Versed, the sedative, was intended, comes in liquid form. The Vecuronium comes in a powder. So again, she's doing multiple things that alter the way it normally should be given. So this should have flagged in her mind, this is not what I should be doing. The Vecuronium comes in a powder. It's not very stable in a liquid form, so it has to be reconstituted. So it would have had to been mixed before injecting it into an IV. Redonda told them that it didn't strike her as odd that she had to actually reconstitute the medication, because she hadn't had to do it before whenever she had given it. After pulling the med, she immediately looked at the back of the vial, not the front or top where the warning labels are, to see the instructions of how to give it. She gathered the supplies to administer and then headed to radiology with the orientee that she had with her. Arrived at the radiology department, found the patient, checked her armband, gave the medication in her IV. She immediately left the patient and went back to the neuro ICU. She didn't wait around. The patient was not being monitored at any time, not on any type of monitoring, not observed in any capacity after this med was given, left alone for 30 minutes. After receiving the med, the patient was not able to move or notify anyone or breathe on her own. After about 30 minutes, she was finally found by radiology staff as being unresponsive and initiated CPR, called a code. They brought her back up to the neuro ICU. She was resuscitated and the med error was noted at this time. Patient suffered an anoxic brain injury, was removed from life support with her family by her side, passed around 1 a.m. the following morning, December 27th, 2017. Redonda immediately admitted what had happened and has never denied accountability. Later in the afternoon, on December 27th, 2 neurologists reported her death to the Davidson County Medical Examiner without mentioning the med error. So they left out that information, deeming the death natural due to a brain bleed. It appears that the medical examiner did not investigate the death. On January 3rd, Redonda was fired from the hospital. Vanderbilt did not report the fatal med error to the state or federal officials, which is legally required. Sometime early 2018, Vanderbilt negotiates some out-of-court settlement with the family, requiring them not to discuss it publicly. Around May of 2018, Vaught begins to work as a coordinator at a different hospital system in Nashville, still has her nursing license at this time. In October, an anonymous tipster alerted federal and state officials to the unreported error. And you can click that link and see that. The Department of Health, who's responsible for licensing and investigating med professionals, they decided not to pursue disciplinary action against her. In a letter to Vanderbilt, they looked at the case, said did not constitute a violation of the statutes or rules governing the profession. She also received a letter saying it did not merit further action. So, in response to the anonymous tip, CMS conducts a surprise investigation. So they conduct this investigation at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt must then prove that they're taking actions to prevent a similar error or face suspension of their reimbursement of funds. At this point, Vanderbilt responds with a plan that appeases CMS. They change the policy so that critically ill patients must be monitored during transport. Change policy so if giving meds that cause respiratory depression, they have to be monitored. Changed high alert med policy to reflect monitoring necessary when high alert meds are given. They changed the medication administration policy to require more documentation and more monitoring, and they discussed their moderate sedation policy. Had some additional updates like chart reviews to check in that the new update were adhered to. A work group created to look at the paralyzing agent override med list, and now they are no longer able to pull paralyzing agents by the drug name. must use and type in paralyzing agent to pull up one of these meds now, requiring 2 nurses to sign off to give the paralyzing agent. They updated the scope of help for all nurses, and then updated reporting requirements to state and medical examiner. So later on the next year, in 2019, the case becomes public because she's arrested on a criminal indictment for her alleged role in the death. She then is charged with reckless homicide and impaired adult abuse. Patients' families interviewed states that they would forgive, fought for the error. Vanderbilt speaks about the error in the Tennessee Board of Licensing healthcare facilities. CEO admits that it wasn't reported and their response was too limited. And they also confirmed the settlement with the family. So later on, if you look on through all the events that happened, she made 10 separate errors before injecting the drug. So if you look at all these pieces of that, 10 separate errors, 10 things that she could have done differently to make this case end differently. Now, Redonda faces 2 legal proceedings. She's looking at a criminal trial and professional hearing. In the spring of 2020, pandemic hit, and then there was trial delays. In July of 2021, her discipline hearing starts. She admits fault, but her attorneys also describe the flawed Vanderbilt procedures and the flaws that Vanderbilt had. She lost her nursing license in 2021, in July of 2021. This is a good bit after her medication error occurred. March of 2022, her criminal trial begins. And then on March 25th, after only a few hours of deliberation, they found her guilty of criminally negligent homicide and abuse of an impaired adult. She was sentenced on May 13th of 2022, faces up to 8 years in prison total between the 2 charges, and her sentences will likely run concurrently. So she's sentenced to 3 years probation. Her mistakes ended her nursing career, and she ended a life. We do all of these legal aspects. We do all of these education pieces and do all these checks rights whenever we're giving medications so that we follow the safeguards in place so that we prevent major errors like this from occurring. Best charting. Whenever you are charting, you always want to think in the back of your mind, chart so that in the event something like this happens, you know exactly what has happened. It should be factual. Your information must be objective and factual. Don't document your opinions. You must be accurate. Record the vital signs accurately for what you obtained. Your information must be complete. Don't omit any important information. Must be timely. You want to document care as soon as possible after doing it. Not waiting until the end of your shift and then trying to remember everything that has happened. The longer you wait, the more you're going to forget what exactly happened during your shift. You always want to make sure you're documenting unusual occurrences. Document your assessment data in the plan of care, and then remember that the client's chart is a legal record and can be subpoenaed in a malpractice case.